Hi everybody, my name's Alex Scott Samuel and I'm a university researcher and teacher and also a co-founder of the pressure group Keep Our NHS Public, which we founded 10 years ago because of the privatisation of the NHS, which of course has got a lot worse under the governments of Cameron and now of May. The NHS is being privatised all around us. We can still mostly get GP services and hospital services without having to pay, but as some of you will know, some services are increasingly hard to get. If you have a cataract, you have to be practically blind before you can get it operated on now. And if you need a hip replacement or a knee replacement because of arthritis, you have to be practically in a wheelchair before it can be operated on, because they're constantly raising the bar. In other words, rationing services. And the reason they're doing that, of course, is because people who aren't prepared to wait and wait and wait to have their pain relieved are increasingly using insurance and going to the private sector, which of course is the ultimate aim of what this Tory government is doing to the NHS. And these ideas haven't just come out of nowhere. They've been with us ever since Margaret Thatcher. And recently papers have been published under the 30-year rule that show that in the early 80s, Thatcher wanted to privatise the NHS. And it was only because there was a near riot in her right-wing cabinet. Even in that right-wing cabinet, they knew that it would be electoral suicide to do anything like that. But in fact, David Cameron and now Theresa May are doing what Thatcher was unable to do. They're steadily privatising our beloved National Health Service. You probably know that there was a law passed in 2012 called the Health and Social Care Act, which is almost 500 pages long because it was written by corporate lawyers. And basically it was written in such detail to make absolutely sure that nothing could be done to prevent any aspect of the NHS being privatised. But they're doing it stealthily because they know how unpopular it would be. So only slowly and gradually are we realising that services are being cut more and more, and it's becoming harder and harder, as I said, to get certain kinds of surgery and so on. And increasingly you see people in the media talking about co-payments for expensive drugs or about charges for services, all of which is permitted by the Health and Social Care Act. And the ultimate aim, the reason we get so much spam from insurance companies in our inboxes is because they know that this government has created the climate in which more people are going to have to look to health insurance to get treatment, and that is their ultimate aim, to have a service like in the US, completely provided by the private sector and completely dependent on health insurance with a very poor quality public safety net as backup, just like in the US. They'll deny all this in public, of course, but those of us who have been looking at this situation for a long time know that that is what they're trying to do. Originally, after they passed their Health and Social Care Act in 2012, they created a sort of open commercial market where increasingly our NHS services, they were forced to put them out to tender, and they were awarding those tenders to the private sector. So lots of companies like Virgin and other private health companies have been taking over NHS services. The NHS now is more like a logo for a contracting operation than really representing public provision as it did in the past. But a lot of people don't realise that's what's happening, and they don't realise how much of our taxpayers' money is hemorrhaging out of the NHS into the pockets of the corporate shareholders of Virgin and United Health and Care UK and all these other dreadful companies. Even Macmillan, who have quite a good reputation, took part in a tender process for privatising cancer care in the Midlands. So no one is immune to this government-promoted privatisation. The current phase of it is called STPs, and it's what I call planned privatisation. Because their commercial market was a complete failure, there was lots of really bad treatment and companies going bust and leaving the health sector in the lurch and so on. They've now moved on to planned privatisation, so that local authorities and the NHS are colluding with the government, often feeling they have no choice in these privatisation plans. STP stands for Sustainability and Transformation Plans, but those of us who know what it's about know that it really stands for secret Tory privatisation, because that's what the STPs are doing. They're increasingly creating a situation where, because of the cuts and the rationing that are going on in the NHS, and that's quite deliberate as well, because of the cuts that are going on, people will increasingly be forced to turn, just as with the PFI in the past, people will be forced to turn to the private sector for funding to bolster our health services. So people have talked in this part of the world about closing the Countess of Chester and Arrow Park and Clatterbridge and replacing it with a new hospital. And of course they would do that through PFI, which is about getting ludicrously expensive loans from the private sector, a completely failed idea that should not be being used anymore. And ultimately, as I say, all of this is about hemorrhaging our money into the private sector and creating an NHS that is dependent on private sector funding and health insurance. So make no mistake, that's what we need, that's what's happening, and that's what we need to oppose. And the current way that we can oppose it is by supporting Margaret Greenwood's NHS bill. Margaret, of course, the MP for Wirral West, spoke here earlier today, and she is having on November the 4th the second reading of her NHS bill, which is basically about renationalising the NHS. And I would like every single person who can hear me talking now to write to your MP and to ask them to be in Parliament on Friday, November the 4th for the second reading of the NHS bill, and equally important, to publish statements of support on their website and on their Facebook and their Twitter feed, saying that they support Margaret Greenwood's NHS bill. So please do that, and please join everyone here today. Sorry, put your name down on the paper here in front of me and on the petitions to support the local groups who are campaigning to oppose NHS privatisation, and do everything you can through the Labour Party, the Green Party, any political party you're in that opposes privatisation, to try and halt this dreadful, evil thing that is being done to the last jewel in the crown of what was our great welfare state. Thank you.
Margaret Greenwood had a bill. She was there before. we didn't get coverage of that, I'm afraid, but might have get an interview in Greenwood. But she's putting forward an actual bill in Parliament to try and reverse some of these changes, and it's really insidious, as you wouldn't think that much was happening to the NHS, would you? Just from looking at ordinary life and things, but it's just insidiously reducing quality of service of a private company.
Jean Smith,
well, very good speech.
Who's a Unite Community branch member, Labour Party member, and also honorary secretary of the Socialist.
Okay, we're going to go to the next file for this.